Hello, friends. This is Jay Hendricks with Powerful Thought Online. Today, as a fellow student with you, I wanted to talk with you about the perceptions of consuming and serving. So, these thoughts come in the wake of this COVID-19 quarantine. I've been reanalyzing my processes in life and how I perceive things and my habits and all of this. So, these thoughts come from that. So I believe that there's a great change taking place in the world. And so I'm trying to allow my perceptions to change and refine according to the new realities that are presented to us. So this is how I would describe, this is my perception, all of these thoughts. And I do need help in my perceptions and perspectives. And so if you have any thoughts on these things, please comment as long as you want in the comments, or any perspectives that you have. It doesn't have to deal with this video, just as long as you're sharing your thoughts with the world. So these perceptions are incomplete. I've tried my best to communicate these things in words. They will always be incomplete, and it is not the truth itself, but it is my attempt to hopefully stimulate my own understanding and your understanding. So anyway, the perceptions of consuming and serving. So I tend to start with this image. So if you've looked at the earth, like a diagram of the earth, and if you have seen a diagram of the magnetic lines of flux that run out of the earth. This is electromagnetism on a grand scale. So if you've seen a diagram, go research it if you want. You could probably type it into Google. So there's the earth, and then the magnetic lines of flux come out of one pole and go around and enter the other pole. And then it goes to the center and it keeps flowing that way. And then, of course, that reverses sometimes. So this is how electricity works. The magnetic lines of flux run around the wires as they're going. So it's a very mysterious thing that's going on in the universe, electromagnetism. So if you look at that, the magnetic lines of flux run in a certain direction. And if you go against those magnetic lines of flux, that's when you take a magnet, two magnets, and if you put the negatives together, they'll repel each other. And if you put the positives together, they'll repel each other. So it's all about the direction. So there is one direction to where you're going with the magnetic lines of flux, and one direction to where you're going against the lines of flux. So I would say that the perception of consuming is running against the lines of flux, and the perception of serving is going with the lines of flux. So I'll break these down for you so they can make a little more sense. So to me, this is the cycle of the consumer. So the consumer, it's that perception's natural state is inner dissatisfaction. Inner dissatisfaction. And if you want to take notes on this, I welcome it. Pause it and go get a piece of paper. But so inner dissatisfaction, I would write under consumer, and that's the natural state of this perception. You could say that's distance, that's self-focus, that's separation, fundamentally. Inner dissatisfaction. Then we go on to the next step of to hold matter. So because you're dissatisfied inside, you seek and hunt to go hold matter, or to hold the matter that is making up your perception, you could say. You could also say, I'm dissatisfied, I want to go have a cigarette. I want to go, eat some fast food. now you're on a hunt to go get something. Okay, so in inner dissatisfaction, then holding matter, and then the next step is breaking that matter. So you get the food and you start breaking it apart by chewing it. You know, you take it out of the bag. This applies at every level. So now you're eating it, chewing it, and then that leads to the next step, which is to taste matter. Taste the matter. And when I say matter, I'm not really specifically talking about atoms or what science says is matter, but any matter, any content, anything that's a form of some sort that is created. That could be thoughts, that could be emotions. So someone who is perhaps narcissistic is addicted to attention. So they experience inner dissatisfaction, and then they pursue somebody, and then to hold the matter, and then they're addicted to attention, so they get the attention from you, and they taste that attention, and so they're addicted to attention. And if you're talking to someone like this, you can feel like they're draining the energy out of you. So that applies on multiple levels. So, inner dissatisfaction. Hold matter, break matter, taste matter. And then the next step is the senses vibrate with satisfaction, or the illusion of satisfaction at least. Senses vibrate with satisfaction. Then the next step is to digest matter. So now it's almost like you have filled up the gas tank, and now you're burning off that gas tank and feeling seemingly satisfied. And then it ends with you get energy. And then once that energy subsides, the inner dissatisfaction bubbles up again, and you go through the process again. So this is a cycle. Okay? And it all starts with internal dissatisfaction, the natural state. So, extreme cases of this, the most extreme probably, that we have as examples would be people like Ted Bundy, or any of the pedophile rings, like you have perhaps researched, perhaps not, but there are, theories that there are pedophile rings, and a lot of people don't understand. It's so terrifying and horrible that people don't understand why this exists. And it's because it's this consumer perception run wild. They're in this cycle of consuming greater and greater forms of energy, and they're addicted to that. It's like, Ted Bundy and these pedophile rings are some of the most vile and horrible addictions you can have. And there's a reason people get caught up in them, and, that's the way of evil, let's say. So that would be the path of pain, going toward or counter the lines of flux. As far as you can go. Okay, so that would be an extreme example of this, and a proper placing of this would be, realizing your individuality. That's kind of the balanced, because the consumer perspective is needed. So the consumer perspective unveils your individuality. And once it's realized, you can forget it. And yet, we should protect our individuality when it's threatened by tyrannical governments or tyrannical people that you're trying to communicate with and that are trying to dominate you. So there's a proper balanced place for this perception. Okay, so another way to understand the consumer perspective would be the process of saying, I am dissatisfied, And then that outside of me is satisfaction. So I am dissatisfied right now. Outside of me, that is satisfaction. I hold my perception on that satisfaction. I get it and I break it apart. I taste it. My senses vibrate with satisfaction. I digest it, and now I am energized. So that is a breakdown of the consumer perspective. Now, if you take the perspective of the server, which is the opposite of this, this is how I would break it down. So hopefully if you list these things, you can see how I just took the opposite of that and got this list, which makes a lot of sense. So the server, you could write the server, the first thing is outer dissatisfaction, not inner dissatisfaction. I jumped ahead. So I said the natural state of the consumer is inner dissatisfaction. Well, the natural state of the server is inner satisfaction. They're not seeking anything outside of themselves to satisfy them. So they're naturally satisfied. So then the first step would be noticing outer dissatisfaction. And that could be, you could say that that's empathy, and then that's tied with differentiation and integration. So when you are a server, when you're on the path of evolution and heading towards more enlightenment, you're not detaching yourself from pain and suffering. You are empathizing. So you are feeling the dissatisfaction of others and realizing that that is your perception that is needing to be unwound. Because our perceptions form around, they layer on top of everything, let's say. So if something is bothering you, dissatisfying you, you see someone is dissatisfied, you see someone's not at peace, you see a process is, tyrannical. You start in your mind by untangling your perception of that. So you notice outer dissatisfaction. So now the next step is you release that matter instead of holding that matter. You release that matter, which your perception is made out of. So you learn to, let's say you see somebody that is very bored, like let's say you live with someone and they're very bored, and that you can see that dissatisfaction in them. Well, in your own perception, you can start untangling that and making it so that you are still satisfied and at peace. And then that influences them, esoterically speaking. So you'll appear to be more calm and more comforting in their presence. And so these things are internal changes you're making that have an effect on the environment, but no one knows. It is hidden or occult. That's the meaning of occult. It's processes that are hidden away from the outer images and from outer seeing. Okay, so you are satisfied internally, you notice outer dissatisfaction, you release the matter, and then you rebuild the matter instead of breaking the matter apart. You rebuild the matter. So now you're forming a new perception of what's going on. So it's almost like you're always seeking to retain that internal state of satisfaction by unwinding and rebuilding your perceptions at all times. Okay, so now, instead of tasting the matter, you experience emptiness. So as you're rebuilding, and that would be the Om, The Om is the vibration that stills all things. So it's almost like starting to paint the picture of your perception with the paint of emptiness, let's say. It's a very clumsy way of saying that, but it's aligning your perception with reality. So it's you're allowing this to happen. You're noticing these holds that you are having in your perception, and you're allowing them to relax and let go. Okay? So, and as you're rebuilding, then the disturbance, the dissatisfaction starts flowing away. So now into emptiness. So now maybe that person's still bored, but you're changing your perception to where you're retaining your satisfaction. And now you're seeing them in a more real state. Your perceptions have changed, and just that internal change has an effect on them. It's a service. Okay, so now, as the form dissolves and you experience the Om and emptiness, and your internal satisfaction is retained still, you've cleared away the clouds. The next step is to expand and amplify instead of digest the matter. Expand and amplify. So your consciousness expands. It amplifies. You see more and more, little by little, in your daily life. So the goal is to retain this satisfaction, and as you do it, your consciousness naturally expands step by step. Change by change, release by release, untangling by untangling. And then instead of being energized from consuming, you are giving energy. You're realizing there's this infinite well of energy within you, let's say, and you are removing the resistances in your perception, and that you're allowing it to flow out more and more and more. And that is unleashing the divinity in you little by little. So now, of course, the server is another direction than the consumer, but we must include the consumer. So I would say a balanced server, one that is serving internally and changing their own perceptions, that is the balanced server. So, but you can take the server perception to an extreme. And I would say people like Hitler and Stalin took it to an extreme. So they saw, of course, they had inner dissatisfaction, I am sure, but they saw the outer dissatisfaction inside them on everything else. And so they were constantly dissatisfied with everything outside. So they would release things out in the environment physically. They would rebuild everything physically. They would try to make it as clean and precise as possible. This is actually mostly Hitler. Make it as clean and precise as possible. So rebuilding everything. And the emptiness, you could say, is we need it to be perfectly clean and empty of all dirt and disorder. And then we need it to be as orderly and still and perfect as possible, and we must expand and amplify that as much as possible. And then the energy given is, we are the government, we'll tell you what to do, and so on and so forth. So you can take these things to an extreme, but the balanced non-dual point of this is to include the consumer perception, which is basically individuality and protecting that when it's threatened, and then forgetting it and going forward and helping to refine your perceptions of the environment, and then that inspires you to act correctly, to behave correctly, to speak correctly, and to bless the environment around you while protecting others' individuality and free will as well. So it's a very tricky business. It's a process that has to be practiced and figured out. That's why I seek other people's perspectives, because my perspectives are incomplete. And the more we share with intent, the more we can refine each other's perceptions and integrate. So, like I will do with the server, another way of thinking about this is saying, I am satisfied. That outside is dissatisfied. I release my perceptions of that. I show it love. I observe it become peaceful. Consciousness expands and aligns, and energy flows. And so these are all done in silence. These things are all done internally in your own mind. And this is redeeming the ego and integrating it into the whole. So I would think of integration is more like putting the right thing in the right place. Because everything has to be included. Everything has to be seen for what it is, and then properly placed in the right spot. So if you're leading with consuming, you're going to be a consumer. And if you keep going that route extremely, you turn into people like Ted Bundy and the pedophile rings. Now, if you're in a balanced state, then you're going to include that consumer perspective as, I have an individuality that needs to be protected, and then put that behind you and focus on refining your perceptions of things outside of you. Okay? So, I'll just read these. Where does the consumer perception belong? Perhaps it is the path of involution and desire, which led to our individualization. If you look at the word desire, desire. Sire is the root for father, among other things, but it's normally the root for father. So desire, to defather ourselves, to separate ourselves from the Father, to leave his presence so that we could become individuals. In one aspect, we're rebelling against the Father. From another aspect, we are seeking to save matter, let's say, to redeem matter. Okay, now, where does the server perception belong? Perhaps it is the path of evolution and love, which leads to our integration into the whole. So the serving perception seems to include and transcend the consuming perception. So we had to leave the Father and become an individual. Now that we are an individual, we can forget that and protect it when we need to, and go back on the arc of evolution. And as we release ourselves, because it took a great concentration and holding to realize that we are individuals. And now that we've realized that, we can start releasing back little by little by little, expanding our consciousness until we have arrived at the presence of God. And we step into the kingdom of God, let's say. So it's a very long process. It's a lot of work. But the people who progress the fastest could be termed the ones who putter along. They do little things, little by little. They don't get hard on themselves too much. They're balancing this. It's like walking. When you're walking, one foot is steady on the ground and you have to lift another up into the unknown. It's unbalanced, and then you step down, and then the other one becomes unbalanced. So to walk forward, you have to balance out steadiness and imbalance. steadiness, and imbalance, and alternate between those. So, anyway, it's these are difficult thoughts that I've been thinking about, and the reason I've taken so long to make another video is because I wasn't sure how to express these things, and I still am not. So I'm sure that you'll have other, things that you see in flaws in my analysis. So it's interesting. Whenever big changes happen and the cycles happen, I have found that inspiration comes in big packets that you have to kind of, it's almost like a download, to where at first it's overwhelming, and then you have to kind of sift through it and put everything in its right place. And we're not perfect, so we don't do that perfectly, of course, but we try. And as long as we're expressing these things, we can see what the flaws are from other people's perspectives and refine it. Anyway, my last thought is, another way to kind of see this from a simple perspective is the process of eating, let's say. So if you look at it from a consumer perspective, you're eating for the pleasure of it, let's say. Now, if you eat from a serving perspective, you are fulfilling the needs of your body. So if you're eating for pleasure, I would say most of the time you'll overeat, and you'll be caught up in this cycle of consuming. Now, if you see it from a serving perspective, and you are fulfilling the needs of your body, then you're not going to eat as much, and you'll tend to eat more of the right things. So that's another example in a practical sense. So anyway, going to try to get on the rhythm again and start releasing more videos more regularly. So we'll see. I'm Jay Hendricks. This is Powerful Thought Online. Please like and subscribe and share your perspectives. They serve others, and they serve others' perspectives and help them see the world in a different way. So don't be shy. And anyway, that's all for today. Kind of a rambling video, but anyway, have a good day. Bye.